Todd, welcome to the program. Of course, always glad to see you. And I feel like every week we talk about the same thing, which is taxes cost money, which is one of the dumber subjects we've had to cover over the course of the last few years or so. But since it keeps coming up, here we are again. Your latest column, your latest blog at Washington Policy is there is a confession, and I'll put confession in quotes because it's not on purpose, but it's a confession from advocates of the Climate Commitment Act that yes, it is true that the tax on fuel costs consumers money. Tell us how you found the confession and what the confession consists of.
Well, as you said, it is a surprise to some people that taxes cost money. The advocates for keeping the CO2 tax, who are trying to get people to vote no on 2117, have said that even if the CO2 tax is repealed, if 2117 passes, that it's not necessarily true that prices would go down. This is really silly, but people like Rachel Smith, who is the president of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, make this claim. You have somebody who runs a Chamber of Commerce saying that tax cuts might not reduce prices and costs. So it's absurd, but they make this claim because they realize that people are feeling the pinch. They realize that it's very expensive. And so what they're trying to do is to say, well, even if you cut the taxes, it might not do anything. So one of those groups is BP. BP is, a major oil company. They are one of the top funders to the No on 2117 campaign because they get subsidies from the tax. They're spending money and they expect to get government subsidies from that tax. So they're trying to defend the tax. And so their campaign, the campaign that they're funding, is making this claim. It's in the voters' pamphlet statement. It's elsewhere. Like I said, Rachel Smith, the head of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, has made this claim. So the question is, well, what did they do? And we can test that because last year, the price of, the price of the CO2 tax.
That's called a dramatic effect pause.
Exactly. I feel like Marco Rubio taking a drink in the middle of it. But anyway, the tax last year was about $60 a metric ton, which translates to about $50 rather a gallon. That was sort of its peak, and it has come down since then to below $30 a metric ton. So it's now about 24 cents a gallon. So what did companies like BP do? Did they just keep the prices the same, right? If you listen to Seattle Chamber of Commerce and BP and others, yes, right? Cutting the price wouldn't necessarily reduce the cost. That's not, of course, what happened. What happened is BP reduced the tax on their invoices. So they actually itemized the cost of the tax on invoices. So people who buy gasoline wholesale from them get an invoice, and all the various costs and taxes are on there, what they call cap at the rack, because the CO2 tax is also called a cap and trade system, is listed on there. And last year, it was about double what it is now. It went down almost exactly what you would expect based on the cost going down. So while the campaign that BP funds is saying, we don't know if big oil companies like BP would return the costs, BP is returning the costs. So this is not a surprise, but it's a constant stream of misinformation about the impact of the CO2 tax, and this is just the latest. And it's so clear because BP's own invoices show that this message is completely wrong.
I want to say, I think this would be a bigger story if this was a falsehood presented from the, the pro-tax cutting side. There's something bizarre going on where this is the kind of the big lie there that would seem to me to be one of those headline kinds of stories where you're claiming a tax is not going to cost consumers money. Everyone knows that when someone cuts a tax, what does a politician say? We're going to put more money back in your pocket. We're going to provide this tax cut for working families. We're going to provide this tax cut for so and so. And everyone recognizes that money will go back in your pocket. Now, somehow on this one, we've got this magical elixir. Reminds me of the capital gains tax, where you have the IRS in 49 other states and numerous other countries all identifying it as an income tax. And yet, for the years leading up to the big debate, it was identified as the state got to call it an excise tax. Then the Supreme Court says, well, if the state calls it an excise tax, I guess that's what it is. So, for the first time in history, Washington State has an income tax choice on the ballot, but it has the political camouflage of being labeled as something else. So, it remains to be seen what will happen with it. There was another claim as well, though, Todd. I didn't mean to cut you short on that one, but also on the CCA, there was the claim that, and I've seen this a number of times with a number of commercials. My mother-in-law, who's 96, she loves Wheel of Fortune. So every time I turn on Wheel of Fortune, I feel like there was this ad about air quality or something where where we're in trouble if the CCA gets repealed. We're not going to have clean air. Asthma is going to go up. All kinds of problems are going to happen, especially in urban areas. And every time I think of your work there, explain why that claim is absurd.
So a couple of things. One of the things that they claim is that our air quality is already getting worse and will get even worse if the CO2 tax is repealed. So the first thing is they had a doctor from the University of Washington, who I guess is a celebrity doctor, is on TV shows and things like that. I didn't recognize his name. But anyway, he wrote a piece in the Spokesman Review saying our air quality is getting worse. Well, that's simply wrong. Our air quality has gotten dramatically better over the last 20 years. So I went and did what he should have done, which is looked at the actual data from the EPA. The EPA keeps the data. We're used to looking at now the AQ, what's called AQI, Air Quality Index, on days when we have smoke. And so I looked at the AQI data, and guess what? Over the last 2 decades, Spokane, in that case, where he wrote the piece, their air quality went from sort of the yellow zone to the green zone consistently over the last 20 years. Particulate matter, which is what he and others have mentioned, dropped by about 25%. Our air is consistently considered healthy now, whereas in Spokane 2 decades ago, the average was slightly into the yellow zone. So
I'm just going to guess, but is a possible reason for that another issue that's related to a ballot issue, which is the replacement of wood burning heat with natural gas? Does that have anything to do with it, or is that a little older? In my memory, people used to heat their homes with wood all the time, but it's gotten phased out now.
Yeah, that's part of it. The other part of it is that cars are just cleaner, right? Cars burn cleaner. There's less pollution from cars. So, I mean, this was something that during COVID I pointed out, which is we had all these cars off the road, and yet air quality in the Puget Sound and a number of other cities across the United States, air quality didn't improve because our cars and everything else is so clean already. It's hard to get much cleaner. So, so the first thing that they simply didn't look at the data, didn't care to look at the data and see how we're doing already. The second thing is, with or without the CO2 taxes, our air quality is going to be cleaner in 2030 and beyond. And that's according to the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. So the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency did a study in 2019 looking at the impacts that time of a low carbon fuel standard and said, how much would a low carbon fuel standard improve air quality? And what they found was basically not at all, because air quality in 2030 and beyond is going to be, much better in Puget Sound region and those other areas than it is today. So that's 2019. That's before the CO2 tax. That's before any of this goes into effect. So even if the CO2 tax gets repealed, our air quality is going to be much cleaner. So then they say things like, well, okay, but we're putting electric vehicle charging stations in, and that will encourage people to get electric vehicles. Okay, except that they don't measure whether the electric vehicle charging stations are actually being used. They just put them in a bunch of places and then say, we figure that they're needed and that will help. But that's not what we see is that doesn't actually increase usage, because one of the things about electric vehicles is their batteries are getting better. People don't, when electric vehicles first existed, people had to charge when they were out because they had what's called range anxiety. So if you went to the store, you'd want to charge a little bit and get as much as you could while you're at the store. That's not true anymore. You can go hundreds of miles on a charge. So you charge it at home. You can do all of your commuting and driving and things like that and still have plenty of range less. So what we're actually going to see is that electric vehicle charging stations in public are used less. They have less an impact on air quality. So I think, look, I have long said that I think electric vehicles are cool. They're very nice cars. They are fast. The ones that we have are basically luxury cars. I don't have anything against electric vehicles, but if you're going to spend money, if you're going to claim that the CCA is spending this money and it's necessary to improve the air quality, then spend it on things that actually improve air quality. When we were in the Seattle Times editorial board, one of the things that Joe Fitzgibbon said was, well, we're increasing monitoring. Okay, but that doesn't improve air quality. There are other things that you can do to improve air quality. And actually, I mean, there are some things in the CCA expenditures that will improve air quality. There are things that improve indoor air quality and other things like that. How much, I think you can, we don't know because those projects aren't done. But here's the question. If they actually think that these projects are so important, why didn't they use any of the $17 billion in new tax revenue since 2019 to spend on these things? They spend huge amounts of money on projects that do nothing for the environment and small amounts of money. And then they say, see, without this, $20 million project, we wouldn't improve air quality. Except that you've budgeted $3.2 billion from the tax and then point to a $20 million project as improving air quality. If this is important, we can find that amount of money in the existing budget. But the problem is that for every dollar that gets spent on legitimate things, many dollars are spent on political agendas, things that have no benefit. And that's really the problem is that there's a huge amount of political agendas and waste, and there's a tiny amount of things that actually do good things.
Question coming up on the screen here. The newspapers are writing a world is going to end, stories about how much money will be lost, corporate greed, keeping the money, plus clean energy projects not getting funded. Is it the end of clean energy projects if this does not pass? I mean, sorry, if this does not fail, I should say.
No, absolutely. Well, that's the other thing is that we have many laws that do the same thing. So for instance, with regards to electricity, even if we get rid of the Climate Commitment Act, which is the CO2 tax, we still have what's called the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which requires Washington's electricity to be net zero by 2030. So we will have to meet that target, and we will have to build more zero carbon electricity in the future to meet increasing demand. Whether the CCA exists or not, people are going to buy more electric vehicles because the prices are coming down. They do have some advantages. They're nice cars. As technology gets better, they're not there yet, but as they get better, more people will purchase them. But we still have lots of other requirements, both federal and state, to do clean energy projects. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy, puts out a map of all the money, of all the projects that have benefited from federal funding from what they call the Inflation Reduction Act, which they now admit didn't reduce inflation, but they just went to spend on environmental programs. They say, oh, look at all these great clean energy programs and projects and businesses around the country that have benefited from IRA funding. So if you look at the map, right, based on the rhetoric that you hear in Washington State about us being a leader and all these things, you would expect to see a lot of those businesses here. That's not true. Very few businesses are in Washington State. The vast majority of the businesses are Tennessee, Georgia, North and South Carolina. Even Oklahoma, I think, has more of those projects than we do. Why? Because they have a better business climate. Businesses want to go where they can be good and be successful. The discussion you just had with Mark about the number of failed startups, the number of failed small businesses we have. We have a very hostile work business environment. Other states that have a friendly business environment, that's where those projects are going. So we are spending more to buy the products from Tennessee, Georgia, and those other places. They're getting rich off of the green economy. We're paying the costs.
Yeah, the absurdities of this particular cycle seem to seem to be growing, and especially this. Going back to your first point, and what we can close with it is just the idea that you would have this massive tax on the back end and it would not affect the consumer. It's so wildly dishonest. It's like when this all started, and you pointed out using the same formula that California uses and others to openly talk about the cost. And the governor said, no, this is hogwash, swill, I think he said, and it was going to be pennies, if anything, and you see that I remember it was controversial when there was a proposed 5 cent a gallon gas tax increase. But again, we're talking about a 56 cent, or 44 cent or more as time progresses, because, there's fewer credits to be sold with every year this thing is in effect. And there's no honesty with the taxpayers about what they're actually going to pay and for what benefit, because it's not a clean air benefit. It's not cleaning the air. They're not even measuring the CO2 reduction in the grants that are offered. So what are we getting with this, other than a massive amount of revenue for all kinds of projects that some political interests are really excited about?
Yeah, well, for instance, one of the things is that they talk about, oh, we need this money to fight forest fires. Well, the amount of money that has been budgeted to fight forest fires that hasn't already been spent is about $12 million. The amount of money to study high-speed rail, not build anything, just
Right.
study it, is $25 million. They spend twice as much from the CO2 tax to study high-speed rail than they spend on all of forest health projects. It just shows sort of the absurdity, right? Why don't they put ads on the air that say, hey, with this money, we're going to study high-speed rail? Because they know that's absurd, that people don't want that. So what they do is they spend a little bit of money on things that people do want, and that's what they put in the ads. They don't put the stuff that actually, where the vast amount of money goes.
How does that compare to the amount we spend on actually creating better salmon habitat and because 25 million just to study light rail? That is just absurd. It's a ton of money.
Yeah, so obviously salmon recovery is very important to me. I have argued for a long time that we need to spend more on salmon recovery because there's a lot of projects. So
Right.
I am happy that there's money in there for salmon recovery. I think we could spend that from the existing budget. And I have been arguing for us to spend it from the existing budget, and we haven't. So people can say, well, Todd, aren't you happy about that? Well, sure, I'm happy about that. But here's the problem is that a bunch of the additional, quote, quote, additional money that gets spent is actually on salmon culverts, which the state is legally required to do. That is not an increase. Those projects are required by a federal court order to get done. All this does is pay for it from a new tax rather than from existing spending. So are those projects new? No, they're just paid for in a different way. So there's a lot of sort of game playing that goes on there. Another one that particularly annoyed me was the Salmon Recovery Funding Board, which does grants based on science, where the best projects, salmon recovery projects are in the state, had their budget cut from $50 million to $25 million in the last legislative session. But then when they budgeted the tax, they put that 25 million back in. Well, they never should have removed it in the first place. So now they're saying, see, we spent 25 million on salmon recovery from this. It's like, yes, but it's sort of like, I was gonna say it's sort of like the sale, right? Where you raise your price and then do a sale and you're back to the same point. It's like that in reverse, where they cut the funding and then restored what should have been there anyway, and then claim, oh, look how good we are. So I have tried to sort out sort of where all the money goes, and it's hard because there's a number of those games. Undoubtedly, we see more funding for salmon as a result of this taxes than we would before, but there's no doubt that a lot of what is claimed is just games playing and not real new money.
Todd, as always, I love it. And I know we'll be talking more at our annual dinner event, October 25th. You can get tickets at WPCDinner.com, and be sure to tell friends and family who are interested in state policy and keeping track and being civically active to check out the dinner at WPCDinner.com and come on out and join us. Should be a fascinating night with General Jack Keane, especially with all that's happening in the world right now, with Ukraine, with Israel, with Iran. I can't think of a better person to provide analysis and insight in that area than General Jack Keane. So, yes, Todd.
Dave, let me say one thing real quickly. There were some questions we didn't get to. Please, if you have questions either that you didn't get to or other questions, please email me. I'm happy to provide information. Always, we have lots of information. We want to get it out there.
Oh yeah, well, we can grab this. There's one question here. An article in the Spokesman Review written to support the capital gains tax said that the very rich people in the state are behind the repeal. And if this, just a side note, this makes me laugh because I saw another commercial while I was again putting on Wheel of Fortune for my mother-in-law, and there was the same claim on the capital gains tax, and in the fine print below there was this ad paid for by like Steve Ballmer, Bill Gates, and I'm thinking, well, I mean they seem like pretty rich people to me. Anyway, and those were the folks that wanted to keep that tax. Anyway, so the article in Spokesman Review was written to support the capital gains tax, said the very rich people in the state are behind the repeal, and if the repeal passes, it'll take money from schools. What is the money behind the campaign to keep the capital gains tax, and why?
So the group that put it on the ballot is Let's Go Washington, funded in large part by a guy named Brian Haywood. And Brian has been asked about this many times. And what he says is, look, he sold his company. He has already paid his federal capital gains tax and doesn't stand to gain anything from this. So he is not in a position to benefit from the reduction in the capital gains tax. The people who do are people who like Jeff Bezos. But Jeff Bezos left already. He moved to Florida and was very public about moving to Florida. Why? Because Washington state law says you have to publicly say that you have changed your primary residence. So he did that. And then soon after, he publicly announced that he was moving to Florida. Well, moving because he had a house there already. Then he sold a huge amount of his Amazon stock and saved, and it's an estimated $600 million in taxes that he would have had to pay. Now, you can say, well, okay, fine, but other people will pay it. Now we have lost Jeff Bezos in this community. Think of all the good the Allen Foundation has done, the Paul Allen Foundation, both as a community benefactor, both as somebody who invested in other businesses and projects to help the state. And now we could have had that in Jeff Bezos, but we've lost that. We've said your only value to us is as somebody we can take money from, rather than somebody who is a part of this community and invest in it. And we have chased him off. And that, I just think, is really something that people don't appreciate that we have lost.
Not to mention, I'm betting that when he bought items, he paid a sales tax. And when you've got that kind of money, you're buying some big ticket items. So,
yeah. I mean, Amazon has already moved, part of its headquarters out of the state. The one more link to Washington state has been weakened, and now if Amazon wants to expand, what's their tie to Washington? They have that little bit less. So it's really cutting off our nose to spite our face. We talk about all the time about how Washington is a hub of innovation, is a hub of creativity, of people who are creating the next great technologies and businesses. And then we treat the people who are those innovators, who have succeeded, who have made Washington's economy strong, at least for some people, and we treat them as if the only value that they have to us is whatever money we can pick their pocket.
And Dave, can I just jump in there just to build on what I said earlier? The small business owners that are facing this and they're trying to sell their business for their retirement, they're going to be at that point in their lives geographically mobile. And it is more cost effective to relocate to another state, which is exactly what Bezos did. He obviously did it with a little more grandeur and a much larger house. But you can see these business owners doing that. In fact, I know of two that are doing it right now. They're moving their residency in order to sell their business and avoid some of these cap gains taxes that the states put on them. And that money's leaving our communities now. So it effectively has had a reversed effect. So I think Todd's point is spot on. Is that that money would have stayed in the community, but now it's going to leave the state.
A follow-up from Joanna. Thanks, Mark. But stick around if you want. Joanna is asking, hey, my question is, why would Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer and Nick Hanauer, why would they want to keep the capital gains tax?
I think, well, especially in the case of Nick Hanauer, he is just a progressive ideologue, right? He is very wealthy and can afford to spend some money to promote his progressive ideas. Look, I think there's a lot of people who say, right, the same people who say, well, why would Brian Haywood do this? What's in it for him? Well, he believes it's the right thing to do in the same way that Nick Hanauer believes it's the right thing to do. People who are, especially people who are wealthy, who can afford the costs of, doing these sorts of things, it's not going to make Nick Hanauer's not going to be poor if he has to pay a capital gains tax, in the same way that Brian Haywood doesn't gain or lose much with these policies. They actually believe these things. And so I think that too often people just turn to, follow the money. People do a lot of things in life because they believe it is the right thing to do. And you can disagree with them. So I think when we argue about these things, we need to point out why they are wrong, not just accuse people of, benefiting. That doesn't mean that BP, who is, supporting the keeping the tax, doesn't mean that they're not incentivized in some way by receiving government benefits. They are. They're going to receive that. So that's part of the equation. But I think people are too simplistic to just boil everything down to, who benefits financially.
I did an interview with Brian Haywood he's one of our champions of freedom that we'll be hearing from him at our annual dinner event on October 25th. And in the interview, I asked him about, that motivation and other things. And, he was talking about growing up poor in Arizona. And he talked about how, we've got these policies where people are acting like they're doing this great favor for the, people that are struggling with their incomes by making these mandates on electric vehicles, or saying, well, we've got the subsidy for an electric vehicle, and now we've got the price down to $20,000 or $30,000, which for somebody who's poor, that's way out of their price range anyway. And they seem to have, they're absolutely oblivious to the pile-on effect of all these small regulations and taxes. And when you're talking about 50 cents a gallon or thereabouts for, somebody who's struggling, to feed their family and make ends meet, that's a huge imposition on them. And he basically, he related to it because he grew up that way, and he's not that way anymore. But he certainly related to the idea that this would be a struggle. And he just said, when he heard that when it came to the capital gains tax, he knew that would thwart innovation, because one of the reasons he moved his company here to Washington State was it had no capital gains tax and no income tax. And then when we decided to tell police not to pursue criminals, he said that was just, that's just craziness. I couldn't figure out how that was happening. So, with freedom comes responsibility, and he took it upon himself. So.
I remember when I had my own small business and I was able to buy my first nice car, and I was driving with my in-laws, and I remember my mother-in-law saying, who grew up not wealthy at all, saying to me, I don't understand why anybody would pay $30,000 for a car. And it was sort of funny at the time because I love cars and I had just paid more than that for my car. But for a lot of people, that's the reality. And telling them, hey, you can now buy a Nissan Leaf, which is essentially a commuter car, for only 30 something thousand dollars. that's just tone deaf for what so many people deal with. And the people who can't take advantage of that still get to pay the gas taxes. They still get to pay, 40 cents a gallon or more and higher, home heating and things like that. And then they're told, hey, just buy a Nissan Leaf. I think it's just really out of touch and callous.
And I'll add to that. You're also paying $130 for tabs on your 1995 Toyota. And if that sounds like I'm speaking from experience, it is true. So it's like, what? Wow. For the privilege of driving around every year. Crazy. All right. We're out of time. Thank you guys, of course, for being on. We'll see you in 2 weeks for Washington Policy on the go. And hopefully at our annual dinner, check out WPCDinner.com. And thank you for watching. And as Todd said, if you have any questions left over and you'd like them answered, you can go to our staff page at washingtonpolicy.org and email Todd or Mark directly. Thank you so much for watching.